立法會
The President.
Justin.
Questions. Question 1, the Honorable Michael TIEN. In May 2018, works quality problems were uncovered in respect of the construction works at and near the Hom Station Extension under the Shatin to Central Link project. The Independent Commission of Inquiry set up by the government for this matter submitted its final report in March this year. The report has pointed out that the MTR Corporation Limited, or MTRCO, and its contractor, Leighton Contractors Asia Limited, or Leighton, were responsible for the serious deficiencies in their management and supervision systems, and the government, as the overseer, had to bear a measure of responsibility. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, given that project mismanagement on the part of MTRCO has led to a number of works quality problems and the delay of commissioning of the rail line, whether the government will consider not paying MTRCO any amount of the management fees for the entire works project. If we still pay such fees, whether the reason, therefore, is that the government is still satisfied with MTRCO's performance. 2, given that Leighton, as the contractor of the works project, has failed to fully comply with the procedures and requirements which aim to ensure works quality and structural safety, thereby compromising its integrity, and yet it is learned that the government has so far not completely disqualified Leighton and its relevant companies from tendering for public works projects, whether the government will consider imposing heavier punishments on Leighton, including blacklisting Leighton and his related companies to permanently bar from tendering for all public works and railway projects, if not of the reasons for that. And 3, given that as the overseer of the project, the government has failed to play the role of an active participant, whether the government will consider holding accountable the main government officials who were then involved, for example, making a public condemnation, if not of the specific actions to be taken, if not the justifications for that. Secretary for Transport and Housing. President. Secretary for Transport and Housing. Thank you, President. The Commission of Inquiry into the construction works at and near. Can you please clip the microphone a little bit higher? Thank you. Thank you, President. Am I coming through? Perhaps it's because of the face mask. Never mind, I'll hold the mic. No, it's no good. Please clip it to the lapel. Am I coming through? Okay. Thank you, President. I apologize for the technical hiccup. The Commission of Inquiry into the construction works at and near the Hom Station Extension near the Shatin to Central Link project, the Commission submitted its final report, to the Chief Executive on the 27th of March this year. After redacting several parts therein to avoid any prejudice to relevant criminal investigations and any potential prosecutions of any criminal offences, the report was published on May 12th this year. The government welcomes the Commission's conclusion that with the suitable measures in place, the station box, i.e. the diaphragm walls and platform slabs of the Hom Station Extension, North Approach Tunnels, NAT, South Approach Tunnels, SAT, and Hom Stabling Sidings, HHS structures will be safe and also fit for purpose. The government respects and is actively following up with the Commission's comments and recommendations. We give a detailed account of the follow-up actions on the recommendations in the Commission's final report at the Legislative Council Subcommittee on Matters Relating to Railways meeting on June 5th. The expenses relating to the Hom Station Extension incident are estimated at about $2 billion. The MTRCL is responsible for all the concerned expenses. Based on the conclusions of the final report, the government will set the responsibilities of the MTRCL and follow up according to the entrustment agreement as and when appropriate. At present, the government and the MTRCL are focusing on project delivery with a view to expediting the project so as to enable the public to enjoy the new railway service as soon as possible. After much effort, we anticipate that the full commissioning of Tuen Ma Line could be brought forward to the third quarter of 2021. By then, the Kai Tak to Hong Kong section will connect with West Rail Line and Tuen Ma Line Phase 1. This will further improve the connectivity between the Northeast NT and the urban area and relieve the pressure on the current transportation network. At the same time, the government has taken a series of measures to closely monitor the MTRCL's project management process. The government will continue to follow up with MTRCL on the Commission's recommendations on MTRCL's areas for improvement and will closely monitor the corporation implementation of the improvement proposals. We understand that regulatory action taken by the Development Bureau against Leighton Contractors Asia Limited, or Leighton, on the 8th of October 2018 in respect of the construction issues of the Shatin to Central Link project is still effective, and that is, Leighton is still being suspended from tendering for public government works projects. The Development Bureau is now reviewing the final report in order to examine and then analyze whether there are new circumstances that have not been previously considered. If necessary, the Development Bureau will, pursuant to the existing regulatory regime, follow up on the case in a fair and just manner. As for legal liability, we understand that the Buildings Department prosecuted the contractor, Leighton, under Cap 123 Buildings Ordinance on the 15th of May this year. Since the case has entered the judicial process, it is not appropriate to comment at this stage. The Hom Station Extension incident is mainly an issue of site supervision. It was recommended in the final report that the government departments should participate more actively in site supervision. We're currently studying measures to improve the site supervision mechanism and is examining the feasibility of establishing a new government specifically tasked to supervise and monitor the planning and delivery of railway projects following the direction recommended by the Commission. The roles, responsibilities, staffing, and structure of the new department are being studied in depth. With the new railway projects under the Railway Development Strategy 2014 progressively entering their planning and design stage, we implement the above measures as soon as possible to ensure that the new monitoring strategy could be implemented before construction works of the project commence, so as to enhance the public's confidence in the quality of railway works. Thank you, President. Mr. Michael TIEN. Regarding the reply from the Secretary, I have a few follow-up questions. Now, Tuen Ma Line finally can be commissioned in the third quarter of 2021. I'm grateful for that because many residents in NT East would only want to make one interchange if they go to the urban area to work. I understand that 1 quarter after the commissioning of Tuen Ma Line, then the Shatin Central Link can cross the harbor. Would that be the case? If not, I will not find that acceptable. And you refer to the issue of site supervision, and it appears that it has got nothing to do with the officials responsible for supervising the works. And I'd like to know people who formulated mechanism have to be held to account. Now, if forms didn't have to be filled in, and it could be provided proactive subsequently, what's the point of the mechanism? Now, you only allowed one follow-up question, Mr. Michael TIEN. You've already asked two. Secretary. Regarding Mr. Michael TIEN's follow-up question, let me respond as follows. Now, the Northeast Corridor and the North-South Corridor and the East-West Corridor are two lines. The planning, the signaling system, and the operation are under different studies. So in my report to the Council, I said the West-East alignment of that is the Tuen Ma Lane of Shatin to Central Link could be commissioned in the third quarter of 2021 after much effort by the engineering people of the government. Now for the north-south alignment that would cross the harbor that would involve replacement of the East Rail signaling system and turning of the trains from a 12-car to 9-car compartment arrangement. And we have to wait until the works on Hong Kong Island are completed and after safety testing that it can be commissioned. We're still working very hard. But according to our latest projection, it won't be completed until 2022. The most important thing is to provide environmental friendly and expeditious and convenient way of transport for the public. But safety is of paramount importance. We will complete the works as soon as possible without sacrificing the safety. Mr. Michael TIEN, if you have other questions, you can press the request to speak button again. We only allow one follow-up question each time, and that has been answered. And what about the people who would devise that mechanism? Should they be held accountable? Mr. Ma Fong Kwok, thank you. In point 3 of the Secretary's reply, we understand that a new department will be set up to supervise and monitor the planning and delivery of railway projects. But the problems related to Shatin Central Link are not just about supervision. So will the administration review the following? In building new railways, will it review its mode of delivery? Now, the MTRCL is given a franchise to operate the Shatin to Central Link, and what are the pros and cons of such a system? Will you have a new mentality in dealing with such projects? Secretary, thank you. Regarding the new department, of course, that is a response to a recommendation by the final report. And we sum up what's in the final report. Now, the issues about railway structural safety. Secondly, assurance of quality of works. Third, the site supervision system. And third, our construction culture and also communication arrangements. So this brand new department will tackle the recommendations by the final report and is full follow-up of the recommendations. Now, according to Mr. Mark, is an entrustment agreement, whether it should be an ownership arrangement or franchise arrangement. There are different considerations. Of course, there are reasons for the current system, and there are undesirable points in the arrangement. We have invited MTRCL to design and plan new railway projects. And regardless of who owns the railways, we adopt a model of ownership, and then we will review the current entrustment arrangement. When we have new railway projects, we will make appropriate arrangements. Mr. Junius Ho. Thank you, President. Secretary, now we must learn a lesson from the current incident. According to the report, the MTRCL and Leighton, its contractor, have serious defects. I understand that you're going to have a detailed account, give a detailed account to us at the Joint Committee on matters relating to railways on June 5th. Now, our railway systems are the most expensive in the world. Our geologists, our soil conditions are either too soft or too hard, or neither too soft nor too hard, and as a result, our railways are most expensive. And the MTRCL have profited so much because they enjoy a monopoly in Hong Kong. So have you learned a lesson here? Well, The mainland is just a river away, and they have built XRL systems that are over 30,000 kilometers in length, crossing hills and valleys and mountains and rivers. And the cost per meter is only about 400,000 RMB. Now, for us, the cheapest is 3.5 or even $8 million per kilometer. So will we consider introducing competition from railway operators or constructors in the mainland so that we can have affordable and reliable and good railway systems in Hong Kong? Secretary, I thank Mr. Ho for his comments and suggestion on the construction cost of railway systems in Hong Kong. We have to understand that Hong Kong is a densely populated city with limited land, and we are only using 7% of the total land available in Hong Kong. So we have densely built areas, and when we build underground railways, we have to take into account change in geotechnical conditions. And we have to ensure the building safety and integrity of buildings and superstructures above the railway, and also impact on the community. Of course, we have our inherent constraints. Can we introduce other contractors or contractors from outside Hong Kong to build our railways? Of course, that can be considered. In places in other parts of the world, including the mainland, when they build new railways, very often they invite the MTLCL to tender for the projects as well. This goes to show that the MTLCL is competent and has the goodwill to build railways. Of course, we have seen disappointing incidents recently, but please let's give this MTLCL with a good brand name a chance so that it can continue to serve the people of Hong Kong. When it comes to the safe operation of railways and also quality assurance of construction of railways, they should do a better job, and then we should also work harder to supervise their works. I hope that in future we can enhance confidence for the MTLCL and also the construction of railway lines by the corporation. Ms. Tanya Chen, President. On the entrustment agreement, there's something between the MTLCL and the Hong Kong SL government. And in the entrustment agreement, there are a few paragraphs on the powers of the Public Accounts Committee. Now, if the PAC, Public Accounts Committee, has a relevant request, will MTLCL and the government, according to the terms of the entrustment agreement, cooperate with PAC so that we can follow up on the various incidents related to the Central Shatin link? Thank you. First, the Hong Kong SL government respects the Legislative Council in monitoring the executive. On various occasions, we have provided information to bodies, including the PAC of the Council. Of course, when the PAC goes about its work according to its powers, we will, of course, cooperate. Which part of your questions have been answered? I asked whether MTLCL would be accommodating. Now, all parties involved including MTLCL, which is a large corporation in Hong Kong. It has a social responsibility. I'm sure it will try its very best to cooperate with the Council in order to sort out the truth or the facts. Mr. Chen Hanpeng, thank you. Although the Commission of Inquiry said that the Shatin to Central link is structurally safe and Leighton has to bear judicial or legal liability. But then the government has an responsibility to bear because the government has got representatives on the board of the MTLCL to play a certain role. Because there have been serious mismanagement and defects in the construction of the rail, I'd like to ask whether the government has reviewed the roles to be played by its representatives on the board of the MTLCL. Should these officials play a more proactive role so that there can be improvement on the governance of the corporation? So for people representing the government on the board, what are their roles and attitude? Will there be any change as a result of this incident? Has there been any review? If so, what is your outcome? Thank you. If we have read the final report of the COI very carefully, you can see that there are issues related to liaison and communications and reporting. The design and construction team on site is particularly important when it comes to communications. For some of the alterations, even the design team were not informed. Last year, when the government discovered the serious issues, the board of the MTLCL and the government clearly stated that the government and even the board of the MTLCL had been kept in the dark because such issues were never discussed at the board of the MTLCL, and the officials or the personnel concerned have left the office. Regarding follow-up measures, we will follow the recommendations of the final report and take follow-up actions. We've also invited teams to carry out an independent audit for us, or an independent review for us. So it's going to be a very serious and rigorous follow-up move, and I hope we can resolve the problems and we can enhance the community's confidence in the MTLCL. My questions have been answered. Government representatives are on the board of the MTLCL. I'd like to know whether there's been any review on their role and any improvement. Secretary, do you have anything to add? In my main reply and replies to follow-up questions, I already said that there have been very detailed recommendations in the interim report and final report of the COI. And according to the report, it's mainly an issue of site supervision, collaboration, and communications. Senior management and also the board were not involved. May I refer members to the two reports? Thank you. Mr. Ray Chen, call for quorum, please.
法定人數
We have a quorum. Let's continue. Members, please return to your seats. Question to Mr. Wilson OR. Thank you, Madam Deputy. The Chief Executive put forward in the 2019 policy address the resumption of the private land in 3 squatter areas in Kowloon East, that is Chow Kor Lang Village, Ngau Chi Wan Village and Chuk Yuen United Village, for the development of 7 hectares of urban sites into a new community mainly comprising high-density public housing. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, of the latest progress of the aforesaid development project, the number of flats to be provided, the population accommodated, and the average living space per person upon completion of the project. 2. Given that the population in Kowloon East is aging and welfare facilities in that area have been in short supply, of the floor area reserved by the government in such projects for welfare facilities. And 3. Given that Chow Kor Lang Village is the only remaining ancient village in Hong Kong, which has a history of 400 years with rich cultural relics and heritage, including not only the Tin Hau Temple of Chow Kor Lang, which has been classified as Grade 3 historic building, but also annual activities in the celebration of Lu Pan Patron's Day and Tin Hau Festival, whether the government has drawn up any conservation framework and blueprint for the villages. Secretary for Development. Madam Deputy, to increase land continuously for housing development and speed up government-led planning, the government announced in the 2019 policy address the commissioning of studies on 3 urban squatter areas, that is Chow Kor Lang Village, Ngau Chi Wan Village and Chuk Yuen United Village, for integrated planning comprising mainly public housing. The studies aim to make better use and expedite development of the sites, suitable for high-density housing development so as to meet the keen housing demand. Our reply to the 3 parts of the question is as follows. 1. In respect of the planning of the 3 squatter areas, the CEDD Civil Engineering and Development Department has commissioned 2 engineering feasibility studies, with the one covering Chow Kor Lang Village commencing in mid-2019 and one for Ngau Chi Wan Village and Chuk Yuen United Village starting in early 2020. These studies will cover formulation of the development options, detailed land use proposals including the distribution of housing, GIC, government, institutional or community facilities, open space and supporting infrastructure and implementation arrangements, as well as technical assessments. On the premise that these projects are developed at a relatively high density, we estimate that more than 7 hectares of land in these squatter areas can provide about 6,300 public housing units. Development parameters such as the actual plot ratio, flat yield and population, etc., will be confirmed upon completion of the studies. In the studies, we will collect views of the local community and stakeholders on the development proposals and implementation table. Our target is to complete these studies in 2021, followed by local consultation and rezoning. Detailed design for infrastructural facilities will also be carried out concurrently to pave the way for funding applications for the works and for land resumption, clearance, and works in accordance with the established mechanism. If things go well, we endeavor to commence works in around 2025 with a view to increasing public housing supply in the medium term. When the epidemic subsides, we will brief affected households, business undertakings, and other relevant parties on the studies, implementation process, as well as government compensation and rehousing arrangements. 2. As stated above, other than public housing, the proposals for these areas will also provide GIC facilities to address the needs from the additional population brought by future development and district demand, based on the scale of the proposed development and the supply and demand of local community facilities, and with reference to the Hong Kong PSG, Hong Kong Planning Standards and Guidelines and comments from relative departments, will start comprehensive planning addressing the needs of the community. Land or floor space will be reserved for facilities for children, elderly, education, healthcare, recreation, and transport, etc. We'll try to optimize land resources under the single-site, multiple-use concept. Details like types, floor space required, and mode of development of GIC facilities will be confirmed in the studies after consultation with relevant departments. We'll gauge views during local consultation prior to rezoning. 3. These three squatter areas have a long history. The study area of Chow Kok Ling Village covers the Law Mansion, a historic building accorded with Grade 3 status by the Antiquities Advisory Board AAB. Manfred Nunnery in the Ngau Chi Wan squatter area is also a Grade 3 historic building. To strike a balance between development needs and heritage conservation, we'll assess in the studies whether the proposed works would affect buildings with historical significance and sites of archaeological interest. Subject to any impact identified, necessary heritage impact assessment and consultation with the AAB will be conducted so as to devise heritage conservation measures. Generally speaking, when formulating development options, our overarching principle is to preserve in situ the graded historic buildings accorded by AAB as far as practicable, and to incorporate these buildings in the development through comprehensive planning. As such, subject to the findings of the studies, our intention is to preserve the Law Mansion and Manfred Nunnery in situ in the development. We will present detailed conservation proposals during local consultation prior to the rezoning procedure. As for the Tien Hau Temple in Chow Kok Ling, it falls outside the study area of the study of Chow Kok Ling Village. Hence, the temple and its associated heritage and conservation activities would not be affected by the proposed development. Thank you. Mr. Wilson OR. Madam Deputy, I feel disappointed with the reply. I feel very strongly. I'm sure this feeling is shared by the public that they are rather too laid back. We have been talking about these three squatter areas for many years. In 2019, they were incorporated in the policy address. Now it's June 2020. By the reply of the Secretary, I'm sure that we would wither if we continue to wait. In relation to development land in NT North East, after two secretaries, it's been over 10 years, and now we've reached a stage of rehousing compensation and clearance. And it will take at least 3 years for the construction. So it's 15 years altogether. I'm afraid that this will be the fate of the three squatter areas as well. Secretary, can you give us an open undertaking? Tell the residents in these squatter areas, because they are in a plight, they live in an appalling living condition. Can you give us an undertaking that there are ways to compress the time required through your coordination so that development can start as soon as possible? Secretary, I thank Mr. OR for the comments and the questions. I do share the anxiety of Mr. OR. In relation to future development, particularly those related to public housing, of course, the earlier the better. But I don't agree that we're laid back. In 2019, as soon as the policy address was announced, we're talking about 7 hectares of land. Over 2/3 of it is under the Chow Kok Ling Village. In the same year, we have immediately started relevant studies. We hope, as I said, that these studies will be completed next year. The Chow Kok Ling Village one will complete first. We have to start rezoning of the OZP for the development of high-density public housing. We have to go through the relevant procedures. It will take time. We hope that works will commence in 2025. That's a rather optimistic timetable. What I can promise, Mr. OR, is that I will review the different segments to see if we can expedite any of them. Well, there are restrictions in our endeavors because, we have to go through the procedures and we have to stick to the mechanism. Mr. Tony Tse. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Increased housing supply, of course, is important. At the same time, we have to accord importance to conservation of our culture and heritage. In part 3 of the reply of the Secretary, in relation to the feasibility studies, he talked about striking a balance between development needs and heritage conservation. If possible, these historical significant buildings will be incorporated in the development. How do you protect these historic buildings? What we can see in reality is that in development and protection of cultural heritage, the design of the facilities and the buildings are not compatible with these historic buildings. You don't just protect the historic buildings, you will have to create a conducive environment for them to play its part. So in relation to planning and design of buildings in the development, how do you make sure that they will beautifully mix with the cultural heritage? Say, for example, the law mansion. Can you maybe organize a design competition so that the professional sector can pick their brains and make the most of it? Mr. Tse has made a very good point. There are some historic buildings or heritage activities that are of conservation value. As I said in the reply, we will conduct relevant studies and assessments. What we aim for that area is public housing. In terms of the facade of buildings as well as pedestrian flow, we will take all the factors into account. It's rather abstract, so I can't go into detail. For each development, we have to make sure that the land is optimally used. We have to make sure that these graded buildings or historic buildings will mix nicely with the new development. Well, there are some examples overseas, and we always do our best. At the moment, I have reservation about the design competition because that depends on whether there is such a need for the development. As Mr. Orr said, we would like to produce public housing as soon as possible. So there is this time factor. If there is a competition, it will take extra time. We have to balance the benefit. We have not included a competition in our current planning. Mr. Edward Lau. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I'd like to ask about the land resumption of the 3 squatter areas. Well, in the past, in relation to squatter areas and land resumption in the new territories, we have seen a lot of examples. So there are clear procedures. Ngao Chi Wan and Cha Kwa Ling are squatter areas, but there are dissimilarities from those in the new territory. So I'd like to ask about land resumption, clearance, and compensation. Will the same approach be adopted, or will that be a different one? Will it take an even longer time? Secretary, I thank Mr. Lau for the question. I thank many members in LegCo. In mid-2018, we have passed an improved resettlement and compensation scheme for squatters. For occupants of squatter huts, if they are not eligible for public housing, we have an arrangement for them to waive these the means test or on income and asset for these residents, so that they can apply for housing under the housing society. It applies to squatter areas in the urban area. We hope that when we reach that stage, this relaxed arrangements will help the land resumption, thanks to members in NECHCO. What hasn't been answered? Just now, the Secretary talked about these resettlement housing schemes under the housing society. They have one in Hong Kong, but not in urban areas. What's your question? What hasn't been answered? Please be brief, Secretary. There are these schemes in the urban area. There is land in Kai Tak. They will be given to the housing society. Some of the flats will be put to this use. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Ms. Dory Lee, I noticed in the Secretary's reply that in relation to the entire development, it will take quite a long time because of the procedures required. I have received the views from villagers in these squatter areas. From now to the freezing survey, to resettlement and compensation, it will take a very long time. And during this time, there has been some illegal transaction of sales, or some villages have been evicted for more profit to be made. Well, in the end, in relation to land resumption or planning, will you start the freezing survey as soon as possible? Start the process for land compensation, so that people who live there, the residents, don't have to live in fear, so that they know what will happen. There will be more certainty. They currently live in an unsafe structure. In the future, they will be able to live in a more safe and secure flat. So will you start the land compensation process and the freezing survey as soon as possible? Secretary, I thank Mr. Wu for the question. I do agree with the direction. Mr. Wu is very familiar with the situation. Well, you have to pick the right time to conduct the freezing survey. Not too early, not too late. And I will see if there are any ways for us to speed it up. There has been examples for us that we would wait for the OZP to be confirmed before we start that. For these squatter areas, we think there is room for us to bring it forward. There are some feasibility studies. They will be completed within the year of 2021. When basic parameters are set, well, as I've said, I hope that by 2021 or 2022, the latest, we will be able to start the freezing survey, which is earlier than previous cases. We'll keep in view the situation to see what more we can do. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, what hasn't been answered? I know that for the study in Chao Kuo Leng, it should be completed within this year. Is it the case that the freezing survey can start after that? It's a new question from Mr. Wu. Anything to add, Secretary? I'll be happy to answer. The Chao Kuo Leng study started earlier, so, well, as to whether it can be completed in the first half of 2021, as soon as we are aware of the baseline, we will start the freezing survey, but I can't say for sure at the moment. It depends on the findings of the studies. Mr. Lo Chi-chung. Madam Deputy. Thank you. In relation to the policy on squatter areas, it's always been close to my heart. in the urban areas, there aren't many squatter areas left. The government's always seen squatter areas as something that are to be cleared, that there's a legacy from the colonial days. But on a policy perspective, it resolves housing problems. Currently, the Secretary has adopted the approach to clear squatter areas for the production of public housing. Squatter areas is a sort of collective memory for Hong Kong. Should squatter areas with special characteristics be preserved so that they will not completely disappear for development of public housing? Let me remind secretaries that there are a lot of people who have lived in squatter areas. They are influential people nowadays. So from the perspective of conservation, will you conserve some squatter areas so that Hong Kong people will be aware of the development process of Hong Kong? Secretary, I thank Mr. Leung for the question. I'm sure Mr. Leung knows. Well, we tolerate the existence of squatter areas. They don't have title, but we tolerate them. We don't have a policy to clear all squatter areas in Hong Kong. It's actually the other way around. When there is a development need, we would proceed with a clearance and there'll be compensation. I'm not going to repeat. There are hundreds of squatter areas in Hong Kong, and we start with these three because they are rather accessible and close to existing public housing developments with good infrastructures in place. In the future, there will be more clearance of squatter areas. It's difficult for us at this point of time to preserve certain squatter areas. It depends on the long-term need of Hong Kong. Mr. Leung Chi-Chung, what hasn't been answered? I think the Secretary has not answered my question. I think, and I've asked, about the preservation of squatter areas with special characteristics because it's part of our history. You can't ask a new question. Well, he hasn't answered my question at all. They said, well, it's never occurred to them about any special characteristics. You want to clear a village with a history of 400 years. That's without any characteristics? Secretary, anything to add? Thank you. A brief reply. Whether to preserve an individual squatter village, it depends on the long-term development need of Hong Kong. At this stage, we have no plans to identify a squatter village to be cleared or to be kept.
Question 3, Dr. Honorable Cheng Chung-tai. Mr. Ray Chen, what is our point of order? I asked for a quorum call. Mr. Ray Chen asked for a quorum call. We have formed a quorum. The meeting resumes. Members, please return to your seat. Question number 3, Dr. Honorable Chieng Chung-tai. Recently, the work and decisions of the Hong Kong Examinations and Assessment Authority, the Communications Authority, and the Independent Police Complaints Council have given rise to controversies across various sectors of society. Some members of the public have queried that such statutory bodies are not only subordinates of the executive authorities which are not subject to public monitoring, and that they have not placed the overall interests of Hong Kong above all else in the course of their actions. In this connection, will the government inform this council? First, whether it will enact legislation to transfer the functions of certain statutory bodies to those bodies with the members elected by members of the public, for example, district councils, so the members of the public will have more opportunities to participate in public affairs. Second, as there are comments that given the resources for operating the statutory bodies being mainly provided by the government, coupled with the fact that a majority of the members are appointed by the government, the independence of these statutory bodies is prone to be questioned, and how government will improve the situation. And third, of the ways to avoid controversies being caused in society again by statutory bodies when they discharge their statutory functions. Secretary for Home Affairs. Thank you, Madam Deputy. My consolidated reply to Honorable Chieng Chung-tai's question is as follows. As a key component in public administration, advisory and statutory bodies, ASBs, play an important role of helping the government in the consultation with stakeholders, formulation of policy objectives, and performance of statutory functions. The relevant bureaus, departments are responsible for the establishment, composition, including the appointment of non-official members, and actual operation of individual ASBs. At present, there are about 500 ASBs in Hong Kong. Of them, 270 are statutory bodies established in accordance with various ordinances. Given the difference in legislative purposes, the nature and functions of these statutory bodies vary considerably, including A. Advisory bodies and committees that advise on policies and public services. B. Public bodies that provide services to members of the public. C. Appeal boards that resolve disputes between members of the public and government public bodies. And D. Regulatory bodies that regulate specific trades. Statutory bodies perform various statutory functions in accordance with the relevant legislation. In general, these functions involve the handling of territory-wide policies of public affairs. District councils mentioned in the questions, established under the District Council's Ordinance, Cap 547, are also statutory bodies, but their functions target at handling matters in the respective districts. These include advising the government on district administration affairs, undertaking community activities, and environmental improvements within the district. Under the current system, if district-specific matters, such as construction of public facilities in the district, are involved in the Bureau's policy formulation or the statutory body's performance of statutory functions, the Bureau and/or statutory body concerned will also consult the relevant district council. The appointments of individuals by the government as non-official members to ASBs are based on merits. When making an appointment, the relevant BD takes into account the candidate's ability, expertise, experience, integrity, and commitment to public service, with due regard to the functions and nature of business of the ASB. As for the Hong Kong Examinations and Assessment Authority, the Communications Authority, and the Independent Police Complaints Council mentioned in the preamble of the question raised by Dr. Honorable Chieng Chung-tai, we have consulted the relevant bureaus. We understand that these statutory bodies are responsible for handling more specialized matters. When making an appointment, the government needs to consider whether the professional knowledge and experience possessed by the candidates are compatible with the statutory body's performance of its functions. To gauge a wide range of public views, the government will consider appointing people of various background and experience, such as professionals, academics, businessmen, as well as representatives from districts and related sectors. Apart from those appointed directly by the government, some ASB members are identified through nomination, recommendation, appointment, or election by the relevant institutions and professional organizations. There is no lack of people in the community who have enthusiasm to participate in public service and have the necessary ability and experience. As such, under the principle of appointment by merit, the government has established internal guidelines to make sure that individuals from various sectors of the community have the opportunity to participate. According to the guidelines, BDs, as a general rule, shall not recommend appointment of a member to serve on more than 6 ASBs at the same time or to serve on the same body for more than 6 years in the same capacity. This is to ensure a reasonable distribution of workload and a healthy turnover of members. Moreover, the government has set a gender benchmark target of 35% to enhance the participation of women in relevant work. To provide more opportunities for young people to participate in policy discussion and debate, the government has set a target of increasing within the current term government the overall ratio of appointed youth members aged between 18 and 35 to 15%. The government has all along been encouraging the public to participate in the work of ASBs so as to enhance public participation in public affairs. Those who are interested to join ASBs may provide us with basic personnel particulars and indicate the policy areas which he or she is interested in through a form downloadable from the Home Affairs Bureau's webpage. The Bureau will put the information received in a centralized data from which BDs may draw reference when making appointments. In fact, the government creates through various initiatives a favorable environment for the public, in particular young people, to join different ASBs, which include regularizing the member self-recommendation scheme for youth launched by the current term government to regularly recruit young people who aspire to serve the community to join more ASBs involving different policy areas. The government has always attached importance to the composition and operation of ASBs and encourages ASBs to take appropriate measures to enhance transparency and commitment to the public. To this end, ASBs have, in the light of their respective functions and nature of business, issued press releases, made available meeting agendas or documents for public access, or uploaded suitable information onto the Internet, with a view to enhancing transparency as far as practicable. BDs will continue to closely monitor the operation of ASBs under their purview and keep in close view the composition to make sure that it meets the operation need and keeps up with the current situation of our society. This is to ensure that the ASBs can effectively perform the statutory functions, make decisions to meet the overall interests of Hong Kong and provide quality public service. The HAB will continue to encourage BDs to keep identifying more talents from different fields to participate in ASBs, allowing them to give full play to their strengths while helping the government to have a better grasp of social conditions and public views so as to achieve effective governance. Dr. Honorable CHENG Chung-tai, Madam Deputy. Well, for this question, I have expected the CS4A to give a reply, but then what is mind-boggling is that we got the HAB giving an answer. In my question, I would like to get an answer. For the current term, as well as the final last term of the district councils, we have got direct elections throughout. According to certain studies, when it comes to public administration, by having the executive authorities absorbing talents from the political sector, it will help to stabilize the society. So why don't you incorporate district councillors into the establishment so as to ease the social division? Instead, you are trying to give priority to one's political stance, and then you are having political struggles. You are dividing the society politically. For the sake of our well-being, have you considered and will you consider doing something at the level of the district councils so that district council members will be incorporated or co-opted into ASBs? Secretary, for district councils, they do have their own functions and powers. As I have said, according to Cap 547, district council members will advise the government on district administration affairs. They will also make good use of the resources available at the district level. I don't want to repeat the provisions in the ordinance. Madam Deputy, Probably you have already noticed that district councils held many meetings talking about district-related issues as well as others. Say up to April, I think over 200 meetings were held by different district councils. Some of them went into long durations. 4 of them had recorded a duration of more than 10 hours. And they distributed the resources given. They also came up with over 300 decisions. So district councils can make good use of their roles and functions to deal with district-related affairs. Mr. Horace Cheung. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Many ASBs operate independently, but it doesn't mean that they have smooth sailing, and it doesn't mean that the government can sort of stay away from it. Take the problem about the exam paper of the DSE under the Hong Kong Examination and Assessment Authority. This is a classic example. It is good that the Education Bureau intervenes, but then a grave mistake has already been committed. So my question is, when there is a problem arising from the work of the SBs, or if one of them fails in their statutory duties, what is there for the government to make sure that there will be timely intervention and rectification to prevent further mistakes being made in the future? Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Thank you, Member, for your question. Well, in relation to the incident mentioned by the member, the Education Bureau took some action. Say, for example, in order to uphold the integrity, credibility, etc. of the DSE, they have already sent people responsible for quality assurance to go to the Hong Kong EAA to look at the vetting and reviewing of question papers and questions. They also try to establish whether the mechanism has been followed vigorously. And of course, they have also asked the Hong Kong EAA to invalidate the question and make appropriate adjustments so as to uphold the credibility and effectiveness of the history examination of the current DSE. The Hong Kong EA is responsible for the DSE, but then this incident has caused public concern. I understand the Education Bureau will review the existing mechanism so as to make sure that the monitoring role of the Education Bureau in DSE will be realized. Which part hasn't been answered? Mr. Horace Cheung. He gave details on the post-event intervention. Is there anything that can be done in a preemptive manner so as to prevent such statutory bodies making mistakes again? Anything to add, Secretary? Thank you, Madam Deputy. Regarding the question asked by the Honourable Member, understand that the Education Bureau will have a further review of their work in the future. They will examine its own role to make sure that the quality can be assured in the long term. Mrs. Regina Yip. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Dr. Honorable Cheng Chung-tai asked questions about the statutory bodies. The first one he mentioned was the Hong Kong EA, but then it is not subvented by the government. It is entirely financially autonomous, with a decrease in the number of candidates. For many occasions, the Hong Kong EAA approached the LegCo to get more funding. At the same time, the Hong Kong EAA handed out bonuses to its own staff members, and on many occasions it was suspected that there was the leakage of exam papers by staff members of the Hong Kong EAA. And recently, a staff tutor, Mr. Siu, was convicted of misconduct in public office and sent to jail for over 10 months for colluding with a Hong Kong EA staff member in leaking the exam paper. So what are we going to do? Don't you think that there should be the tightening of the monitoring to make sure that there won't be unlawful behavior and there won't be the misuse of the resources provided by the government, and at the same time they try to approach the LegCo to get more funding without any regulation, any monitoring at all? Secretary, for such ASBs, as to the source of the funding, well, in fact, there are different sources. Some will charge a fee. Others will rely on income from investment or from donations. As Mrs. Yip has mentioned, there is in fact a mechanism for the sake of monitoring. In the case of non-compliance, we can also count on other laws and regulations to deal with breaches of our law. Of course, in the future, when it comes to the oversight, not just by the public and not just by the LegCo, as in the case of the Hong Kong EA, the Education Bureau will also review the operation to make sure that professionalism will be upheld, and then the SBs can really achieve their mission and vision. Mr. Jimmy Ng. Thank you, Madam Deputy. For statutory bodies, well, they act as a bridge between the community and the government. They are not just advisory in nature. They also perform certain statutory functions. Say, for example, the Trade Development Council, the Productivity Council, as well as the Export Credit Council, established in the past century. They have contributed a lot to our society. They are subject to the respective ordinances. They have to report to the relevant governing bodies. The Director of Audit, the Ombudsman, etc., can also look at their work. So it is not true to say that they are not subject to any monitoring at all. But then most of the office bearers are not remunerated. And given today's climate, for the statutory bodies, their members may be caught in political crossfire and they're under huge pressure when they perform their functions. As a result of such an unhealthy climate, many talents are discouraged from joining the work of such statutory bodies. What have the government got in place to address this problem, and what will be done to attract more people to join the ASBs? Secretary. For the majority of our ASBs, members don't get paid, so members are working as volunteers. Sometimes they have to attend very lengthy meetings. I've also noticed that in the past, we have tried to get more people to serve the public. They have been discouraged from taking part in such ASBs, but then things aren't really that pessimistic. I recall that I was on a committee to interview candidates who would like to join the ASBs, because we do have a member self-recommendation scheme for youth. I recalled that the response was good. It was first launched in October 2017. There were 3 phases. 5,000 applications were received. 32 committees were involved. There were 71 places. They've almost all been filled. What is also encouraging is that when we interviewed the young candidates, sometimes there were only 2 places for a specific committee, but then we got young people of high caliber wishing to join those committees or other committees. We also said that they could be encouraged, and they have in fact been invited to attend the activities of the ASBs, and the response was good. Young people can actually help us to communicate with their peers and the use of new technologies. I can also share one other figure with you. there were 3 phases under the self-recommendation scheme, and there were 71 places available. In fact, 250 other places were sort of offered to the candidates taking part in the scheme. So we do have opportunities for the enthusiastic young people to join our SBs. Mr. Yip Kin Yun. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Just now, Mrs. Regina Yip referred to the case of the Hong Kong EA. I must clarify one point. She said that Hong Kong EA staff members colluded with a star tutor to commit crime. I don't think that's the case. I think it's a matter of part-time workers or invigilators. So I need to clarify that point on behalf of the Hong Kong EA. Now, for Dr. Zhang's question, he referred to the Hong Kong EAA, and of course the incident has caused a lot of concern. Well, my question is, on this occasion, the EDB condemned the Hong Kong EAA and then sent a team to carry out an investigation of the Hong Kong EAA. For ASBs like the Hong Kong EAA, many people have been appointed to sit on the board of such statutory bodies. If the government doesn't trust the members and if they try to intervene in such a barbaric way, then I just want to know the following. In future, how is the government going to treat the statutory bodies? Will the distrust remain? Will you still be condemning the statutory bodies and carrying out an investigation into their work so as to have the effect of discouraging people from joining the SBs? Secretary, in my opening remarks, I have already said that SBs are important for our public administration. And I've also pointed out that there are different SBs and members' professional knowledge and participation have facilitated the implementation of policies as well as the regulation of the relevant trades and industries. We do benefit from such an arrangement. My view is that the majority of the SBs are able to fulfill their functions, and we haven't got anything like what the member has referred to. I think the Secretary for Education has already responded to that incident. I'm not going to go into the details.
Question number 4, Mr. Christopher CHEUNG. Mr. Ray Chen, point of order. Quorum call, please. Mr. Ray Chen claims a quorum call. We have a quorum. Meetings is soon. Please return to your seats. Question number 4, Mr. Christopher CHEUNG. Madam Deputy, with the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic having dealt a heavy blow to the global economy and showing no signs of abating, coupled with the continued wrestling between China and the United States in various aspects, financial markets around the world have been very volatile lately. However, unlike other stock markets, Hong Kong stock market does not have a circuit breaker mechanism in place. In respect of ensuring the stability and continued development of the local financial market, will the government inform this council: 1. Whether it will review the volatility control mechanism in the local stock market, and if there is a need to introduce a circuit breaker mechanism, so as to ensure that Hong Kong stock market can maintain a smooth and orderly operation amid the turmoil in the international financial markets, if so, of the details of such review, including consultation with stakeholders. 2. Whether it has reviewed if the various exchange participants have now taken sufficient measures in response to the epidemic. For example, how the authorities ensure the normal operation of the market in the event that some brokerage firms have to close their offices temporarily due to the epidemic and as a result are unable to settle the transactions on that day. And 3. Whether it has examined the challenges and opportunities brought to the Hong Kong financial market by the wrestling between China and the US, which has extended to the areas of finance and technology, how the financial services industry of Hong Kong may play a greater role in the development of the financial services in the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area, as well as if the proportion of investment in local stocks in the investment portfolio of the exchange fund may be increased. Secretary for Financial Services in the Treasury. Madam Deputy, financial markets are fast changing. To safeguard financial security, the government and financial regulators have been working closely together in the cross-market, well-coordinated and cross-time zone monitoring of all sectors of the financial market, including currencies, stocks, futures, derivatives, etc. Since each market is unique, the approach of monitoring and control in each market also varies. The Securities and Futures Commission, SFC, is responsible for regulating the trading activities in the securities market to ensure that there is no abnormal trading and position holding, as well as market manipulation. The SFC also keeps a close watch on the operation of the intermediaries to ensure that the market can operate in an orderly manner under a stable environment. In fact, the financial system of Hong Kong has withstood crises over the years and has been operating in a fair and orderly manner. We will continue to monitor the market closely and strengthen the enhancement measures as necessary to safeguard the financial stability of Hong Kong. Having consulted the SFC and the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, HKMA, we'd like to respond to the three parts of Mr. Christopher CHEUNG's question as follows. 1. In 2016, the Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited introduced the Volatility Control Mechanism, VCM, under which a cooling-off period would be triggered if the volatility of a stock as covered reaches 10% within 5 minutes. The Hong Kong Stock Exchange consulted the market on proposals to enhance the VCM in 2019. In light of the general support from the market on VCM enhancement, HKEX has implemented the first phase of enhancement measures since mid-May this year by expanding the coverage of VCM from 78 constituent stocks of the Hang Seng Index and Hang Seng China Enterprises Index to almost 500 constituent stocks of Hang Seng Composite Large Cap, Mid Cap, and Small Cap indices, with triggering thresholds respectively set at 10%, 15%, and 20% plus minus to the last traded price 5 minutes ago. The Hong Kong Exchange will review the market operation 6 months after the first phase of enhancement measures and decide on the timing to implement the second phase of enhancement measures. Multiple triggers per stock covered under the VCM per trading session would be allowed by then. In conducting the above-mentioned consultation on VCM enhancement, Hong Kong Exchange also invited market feedback on whether market-wide volatility control measures, such as market-wide circuit breaker, should be introduced in Hong Kong. Due to the mixed responses across the market, Hong Kong Exchange will not make a firm decision on the matter at this stage. We wish to point out that volatility control measures adopted in securities markets around the world are unique, and some of them may not be applicable to all. Hong Kong Exchange will, having regard to the feedback received from the above-mentioned consultation, formulate a feasible model for further market engagement. 2. Hong Kong's financial system has withstood crises one after another. With our resilient regulatory regime, Hong Kong can cope with the ever-changing market. Financial regulators and the trade have also, in response to the novel coronavirus epidemic, adopted an array of measures to maintain business operations and provide necessary services whilst minimizing the risk of infection. The SFC has inquired licensed corporations or LCs on their business continuity plans adopted and noted that some LCs had already adopted contingency measures in response to the epidemic or other reasons that had prevented employees from returning to the workplace. Specific measures include working from remote office, relocating of some functions to different offices, etc. In light of this, the SFC is pursuing a flexible approach to ensure that markets continue to function properly while safeguarding investor protection. As of now, all trading and settlement were orderly conducted. The SFC will continue to monitor the market closely to ensure that it will operate efficiently and fairly amidst the extraordinary conditions that it is experiencing. 3. Given multiple unstable factors affecting the situation around the world and locally are at play, it is inevitable that the financial markets in Hong Kong will become volatile. Notwithstanding the above, Hong Kong's underlying fundamentals remain strong, and the core competitiveness remains unchanged. We will continue to maintain Hong Kong's position as a major international financial center, leverage Hong Kong's connectivity with the mainland and international market, and exploit the opportunities presented by, among others, the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area development. On the 14th of May, as we all know, the People's Bank of China and respective mainland authorities jointly promulgated the opinion on providing financial support for the development of the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area, or the opinion. Out of the 30 items, the opinion sets out 26 concrete measures for the financial services development of the Greater Bay Area to further promote financial liberalization and innovation, as well as deepen financial cooperation between mainland Hong Kong and Macau. Among others, Item 18 of the opinion supports the opening up of the securities sector, the setting up of a foreign-owned securities company, fund management companies, and future companies orderly in the Greater Bay Area in accordance with the law, the expansion of business scope of eligible securities firms in accordance with the law, and the participation of Hong Kong's private equity funds in financing innovation enterprises in the Greater Bay Area innovation enterprises. We will continue to liaise closely with the mainland authorities and take forward the measures in the opinion progressively in a risk-controlled manner, with a view to leveraging the opportunities brought by the Greater Bay Area development and promoting the development of the local financial services sector. Separately, the exchange fund primarily invests in highly liquid foreign currency assets to ensure that it can readily liquidate assets for achieving its statutory objective of maintaining Hong Kong's monetary and financial stability. The HKMA has been cautious towards investing in Hong Kong dollar assets and currently has no plan to change such investment strategy. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Mr. Christopher CHEUNG. Madam Deputy, as the saying goes, with challenges we also have opportunities. My question is about the government's assessment on US's claim on sanctioning Hong Kong and what pros and cons will be brought about to our financial market. Apart from deploying more resources, should the government be more proactive in developing RMB denominated financial products in Hong Kong? And will more facilitation measures be rolled out to speed up the returning of Chinese-backed concept stocks in Hong Kong to bolster Hong Kong's status as the international financial center? Secretary. The Hong Kong government has been monitoring closely the impact brought about by the China-US trade conflicts. Apart from our sustained monitoring effort, we continue to ponder how, in light of the changes in the financial markets around the world, we can grasp new opportunities. For example, for China enterprises listed in US markets, they may be more proactively considering listing in Hong Kong. If international financing is required for innovative enterprises, they will also actively consider Hong Kong as a platform. Recently, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and the MSCI also reached a cooperation plan on rolling out 37 Asian and EMEA products in the region. All these would bolster Hong Kong's status as a premier risk management center in the region, and also it will represent a step forward to building our status and instilling investors' confidence. With the continued wrestling between China and the US, there have been more uncertainties in the global market, and it is more necessary for investors to look for a stable market for investment. In Hong Kong, we have an open, transparent, and efficient monitoring regime, and as such, we have an edge in attracting these investors. We'll continue to give full play to our advantages and bolster our status as the international financial center. We'll also leverage on our connectivity with the mainland and the rest of the world, and also grasp the opportunities presented by the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area to develop Hong Kong into a wider and deeper financing platform, and to further enhance our status as the offshore renminbi risk management and wealth management center, as well as a green finance hub, and also to promote the development of fintech. Thank you. May I urge members to Secretary to focus on the relevant question and answer. Mr. Ronald Chan. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Secretary Mr. Hui said in the last paragraph of the replies that the exchange fund primarily invests in highly liquid foreign currency assets. However, after making such investments, there will be similar hedging strategies to minimize the risk of foreign currency exchange. Well, it's said that the HKMA has been cautious towards investing in Hong Kong dollar assets. However, the same hedging applies, and that Hong Kong dollar can be converted into foreign currencies. So my question is this. About investing in highly liquid foreign currency assets, is it really about the currencies themselves, or is it the strategy to avoid over-concentration on Hong Kong dollar assets? Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy. About the investment strategy of the exchange fund, we have a number of considerations. As mentioned just now, there is a concern on over-concentration. Mr. Paul Chair. Thank you, Madam Deputy, for the reminder, because 14 minutes out of 22 minutes have been spent on answering a particular member's questions. As for the numerous follow-up questions, I don't think it is in line with the principle of asking supplementary questions here. In paragraph 1 of the Secretary's reply, there is so-called a cooling-off period, that is the VCM, volatility control mechanism, and that it should be implemented in phases to allow adjustment. Well, in light of the global COVID-19 pandemic, together with the continued wrestling between China and the US, we now are facing such an unprecedented catastrophe. And my question is whether we can be act more swiftly and efficiently to have a VCM instead of implementing the reform in phases. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Thank you, Member, for the question. The Hong Kong government and financial regulators have been monitoring closely the market to ensure that transactions are conducted in an orderly manner and that the market is developed in a progressive and orderly manner to maintain stability financially in Hong Kong. The financial regulators also have some responsive measures, for example, margin requirements for hedgings and also the limits or cap on holding positions to cope with market fluctuations. At the moment, all market participants have been complying with the relevant requirements. Then there are also capital requirements and source of capital requirements to ensure that all licensed corporations have liquid assets and to ensure that in their operations they will be able to repay any outstanding debt. As for the clearing and settlement arrangement, at the moment everything is smooth. Mr. Paul Chair, I understand that he's a new secretary, and I understand his anxiety in answering members' questions, but you're totally not answering my question at all. Well, if you say that we will consider this suggestion, then I would have accepted this answer. But you gave a totally irrelevant answer. I'm asking against this backdrop, will you expedite the implementation of the VZM so that we have more flexibility in dealing with any crisis? Anything to add, Secretary? Thank you, Madam Deputy, and thank you, Member, for the question. Just now, when I answered the member's question, I mentioned that all volatility mechanisms in other markets are unique, and likewise, the Hong Kong Exchange will continue to discuss with the sector and, in light of the market developments, consider adjustments to the strategy. Mr. Charles Mok, Secretary. You sound very optimistic in your reply. You mentioned that China enterprises may come back from the US and be listed in Hong Kong, and new enterprises as well may be listed in Hong Kong instead of in the US. However, we also have news about these companies scaling back their investments. Now, our concern is that instead of being an international financial center, we're now the financial center for mainland China. We're putting all eggs in one basket, in other words. And about weighted voting rights, this will pose a greater pressure on corporate governance. Now, you talked about diversity of our market, but it seems that our market is getting more homogeneous. In other words, we are aligning ourselves with the mainland market. Are there policies from the government to allay markets concerns? Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy, and thank you, Mr. Mok, for his question. The positioning of the financial market in Hong Kong is very clear. We stay connected with the mainland and with the global market in terms of our product and liquidity of assets. We've been attracting international investors to be listed in Hong Kong and also for the China enterprises to be listed in Hong Kong for the same purpose, and that is to consolidate our foundation for new products to be made available in the market. Second point about liquidity is not just about mainland enterprises. We also have global enterprises such as Shanghai Hong Kong Stock Connect and Shenzhen Stock Connect. We see we provide a platform for such an exchange so that we provide suitable products to meet the needs of investors. In terms of this exchange, this is the uniqueness of Hong Kong as an international financial center. As for new directions and new developments in the future, this is about how we strengthen our platform and widen our platform, including ETF and other products. In terms of liquidity, we continue to keep better connection with the mainland and global markets for new funds to flow into our market.
Last oral question seeking oral reply. Honorable Alvin YEUNG. It has been reported that the Education Bureau last month requested the Radio Television Hong Kong RTHK to vacate and hand back the Education Television Center and Broadcast Route by September this year. Besides, the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks Corporation, HKSTBC, has planned to resume the premises located at Inner Center in Treasury Avenue, which is currently used as the office as the General Program section of RTHK TV Division. In January 2014, the Public Works Subcommittee of this council voted down the proposal to upgrade to Category A the project to construct a new broadcasting house of RTHK. In November 2017, the government indicated the project has been downgraded from Category B to Category C. But such an adjustment would not affect RTHK from continuing to explore feasible options, including the exploration of the relevant government departments the feasibility of constructing a joint user building. And RTHK would take forward the BH project in accordance with the established mechanism. Regarding the office accommodation of RTHK, will the government inform this council, 1, on the progress of the Broadcasting House project, BH project, whether it will expeditiously upgrade the project to Category B, and at the same time, accord a high priority to the project, as well as provide RTHK with additional funding to meet expenditure on renting new offices before the completion and commissioning of the new BH. 2. As RTHK has over the years been the sole use department of the Education TV Center, whether EDB would defer the resumption of the facility or grant the site concern to RTHK by way of temporary government land allocation until the commissioning of the BH. And 3. As the government has repeatedly stated in recent months, RTHK must fully abide by the charter of RTHK and duly fulfill the obligation of public service broadcaster, whether it has assessed if the decision to resume the above premises will hinder the fulfillment of such obligations by RTHK, including meeting the target number of hours program output by the current financial year. Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development. President, as government department, the RTHK has been allocated sufficient resources under established mechanism for providing public service broadcasting. Our reply to various parts of the question raised by the member, prepared in consultation with the EDB, is as follows. 1. As for the new broadcasting house, the new BH project, the government submitted to LegCo, the Public Works Committee (PWSC) on 18th December 2013 a funding application of $6 billion for the construction of the new BH in Chung 1.0. However, the application was negatived at the PWSC meeting on 3rd January 2014. Subsequently, the government had reduced the cost to $5.3 billion in response to requests to PWSC. Unfortunately, consensus could not be reached among the members after rounds of communications. Hence, the government informed the PWSC on 29th of January 2014 that it would not submit the revised funding application to PWSC for another discussion. Having regard to the views of LegCo, operation needs of RTHK and the need to ensure that the reserve site would have better economic benefits, the government had proactively taken forward the construction of the new beach on the basis of a joint user building. With the assistance of the Architectural Service Department, the RTHK is discussing with departments which are interested in the joint use building on the respective requirements as well as project design and planning. RTHK will continue to take forward the new BH project in accordance with the established mechanism. RTHK currently uses different government properties as offices and for program production purposes. RTHK also rent other properties subject to its operation needs, and expenditure involved is met by existing resources. Meanwhile, the RTHK will continue to step up maintenance and repairs and to take measures to improve the facilities and working environment of the building located in Broadcast Drive with a view of coping with operational needs. 2. The Educational Television Center ATC at 79 Broadcast Drive has all along been owned by ADB for the purpose of producing school education television ETV programs. Since the commissioning of the ATC, ADB staff have all along been working in the ATC, and RTHK is not the sole user department. During and before the financial year 2019-20, RTHK was responsible for producing the ETV programs for ADB. To facilitate program production, ADB has thus shared the use of its ETC with RTHK. Following the change in the production mode of ETV programs in light of the recommendations made in Director of Audit Report No. 71, published in October 2018, RTHK is no longer required to produce 62 ETV programs for ADB each every year. And RTHK posts responsible for ETV production have also lapsed in this financial year. It has been seen that the original purpose and the service need for the RTHK staff to use ETC no longer exist. There's also need for office accommodation within ADB arising from continuous development of own services in recent years. Hence, ADB recently informed RTHK, requesting RTHK to move out from ETC by September this year. ADB will continue to discuss with RTHK on the arrangements and timetable on moving out in order to meet the operation needs of both parties. 3. RTHK expects the reprovisioning of offices and the production facilities at Inno Center and ETC has no impact on program production. RTHK has sufficient resource and equipment for providing public service broadcasting to fulfill the public purpose and mission under the mission of the RTHK Charter. Mr. Yeung, in this budget, the year 2020-2021, the production hours will expect to increase. In my written question, currently the RTHK had 4 studios, one of which at ETC. After resuming the building, the staff will have to check the studio at the television tower, which would only be cutting from 4 to 2. So are you planning to cut the production hours, or the secretary as the department responsible, or you will help to tell to Mr. Calvin Yeung, Treasury Secretary, to help make RTHK stay to make to fulfill their program target for this year? First, the RTHK had their own production center and offices, usually in their main broadcasting house and television house. And currently at the ETC, there is one production center. Well, as RTHK has stopped producing ETV for ADB, its mission has been completed. Currently, in the production facilities owned by RTHK, the average utilization for the whole year, even at its peak, is around 70%. Well, for the less busy period, it's around 50%. The RTHK informed us they do have a sufficient production space for their work. In my main reply, the relationship between RTHK and EDB has ceased, and the ED would like to resume the space its own. That's perfectly reasonable. As for the exact arrangements, the different departments can sit down together, and we're happy to allow some coordination to make it happen. And the staff at the RTHK ETC have frequently used it as an office for production, which that could be easily replaced and elsewhere. Which part not covered? The 70% is really the average number for a day, a night, a weekend, and weekdays. Well, that's not true. That's not effective reduction. That's not your question. It's just making a statement here. Mr. Ted Hui. Thank you, Mr. Lang. Speaking of the office accommodation for RTHK, well, you would simply hang the RTHK dry and targeting on all aspects, and well, to file complaints and want to disqualify them. Most recently, they have set up a task force to look into the governance and control, but yet the director of broadcasting and a staff rep is not included. So what are you reviewing? Do you want to call it an overhaul team instead of a review team? Let's stop fake to pretend it's democratic. You just tell the RTHK should not criticize the government and should not criticize the police, otherwise you would disqualify or even fold it. So is that your policy towards RTHK? Mr. Ted Hui, that is not a question in the main reply. Would the Secretary take this question? Well, the accusations leveled by Mr. Hui, I could not concur. Well, as a government department, over the past decade, the resource allocated in total recurrent expenditure increased by 122%, and the manpower has increased by about 45% or more. Well, in the latest budget, the headcount reduction is caused by, well, the Public Accounts Committee have accepted the Director of Audit number 71 report, and we decided to delete this post relation to ETV. And for the public broadcaster, the government has provided the resource based on its needs. And most recently, we've set up a review team and have stated clearly on the terms of reference. I will not repeat it here. Mr. Yu Shi-wing. What a point of order. It didn't reply. Well, both of your questions should not be raised. Well, at least you should listen what my questions are. Please sit down. Mr. Yu? Well, according to RTHK Charter, it had a social responsibility. Unfortunately, the current affairs program are not fair and balanced, with a mediocre production quality and bad ratings. The longer the organization, I haven't raised my question. The operation procedures and habit were deeply ingrained and difficult to change. Most recently, the government has set up a team to look at the governance, which I see as a positive. May I ask Secretary, besides reviewing the RTHK operations, will it also look into how the RTHK manage its staff and its office accommodation? Well, may I remind the member, this question is about the broadcasting house. We should not touch on other subjects, but will the Secretary reply to Mr. Yu anyway? Well, the dedicated task force touched on three aspects. First, to review the administrative management, including the financial and the HR and the procurement, and also the value for money audit, and also the compliance with government regulation. That's the first area. Well, indirectly, which also include what Mr. Yu said. If Mr. Yu was asking what to do with the resource utilization, so definitely related. The second target is to review the implementation recommendations in the Directive Audit Report. And thirdly, and also for the overall management regime and the implementation and compliance, and for sure it fully complies with the RTHK Charter. So we're happy to take views, however, we shall undertake this together with RTHK. Mr. Roy Kwong. So you wanted to do all the job but not giving them any resources. So it offers 7 radio stations and 5 TV channels and quite a number of apps. We expect to churn up tens of thousands of production hours. So it's amazing of what can you do with so little money. On one hand, you're asking to produce so much but not giving them the space. But now that For the broadcasting house and television house have 247 repairs last year. And you thought you can really chuck RTHK. Actually, it's actually doing a better job at getting more popular in Hong Kong. Secretary, in 2013, you applied the funding for the new broadcasting house. Well, it's been 7 years since. Secretary, in your main reply, you talk about the joint user building. Does that mean that after you leave office that the RTHK will get a new broadcasting house? In my main reply, I had explained that the new BH project was proposed by the government back on 2013, December 18. Unfortunately, and on 2014, January 3rd, has been vetoed by the PTBSC. And afterwards, the government would like to seek a consensus and incorporate, take your views on board to slashing the budget from 6 to 5.3 billion. While we submit a new proposal, we're not able to reach a consensus. Thus, we respect the collective decision of LegCo. However, we should not stop there. We'll continue to working in the direction of a joint user building. As for the resource question raised by Mr. Kwok, I've stated repeatedly, as a government department, we had a established mechanism in place to deal with any resource application, and would also would base on their own needs and the overall government policy. RTHK, like all departments, will provide appropriate allocation. Well, as a public service broadcaster, given 1 billion in budget and almost 760 staff will be sufficient to fulfill its role. Well, as a public service broadcaster and the government department also would need to take on board of the public views to further improve their work. Which part of the question not answered? The President. Well, so a skyscraper will take less time to build. Well, you're fooling no one. Dr. K.K. Kwok. Well, the Secretary is supposed to help the RTHK to get sufficient resources. So 7 years on, we couldn't get a new broadcasting house. The loyalist camp is colluding with the government and vetoed the plan. Now, the new BH project, I suppose, is just a sham. A simple question. You have two options. One, to sit down with RTHK for the ETV center and allow them to stay at Edo Center. And second, you might just state it clear that within your term of office, you want to murder RTHK, you just want to destroy it. Would you want option 1 or 2? President. The member should know very well of the public works procedure. We have the PWC meeting and the FC meeting every week. Every time the government submit their proposal, would try our utmost to get it passed. Well, for the new RTHK BH plan have been vetoed. However, we're still working along this direction. I also understand that members and the public have different views on the government works project. Thus, we take a compromise by the way of a joint user building. I don't want the members get mixed up that by not having a new BH would prevent RTHK from operating effectively. Besides the broadcasting tower, they also rent other office premises. And members also mentioned that whether there's any insult to injury, and each year the maintenance resource will be based on the actual needs, for example, of $56 million on such purposes. And well, the office accommodation need to be practical and met is built. Well, not because at the age of the building. We'll take another channel for the Hong Kong Observatory, have been constructed since 1883, is still operating as a heritage building. So in terms of able to fulfill its function, the government will ensure it allocates sufficient resources. Mr. Paul Chair, which part question not answered? I'm asking we choose option 1 or 2, simple as that. Well, RTHK is the second most popular media in the public. Well, I'm asking either you fold it or give them enough space. We're not taking away questions. 1 or 2? Mr. Potter, back in 2013, the new broadcasting house was vetoed, despite the budget being from 6 to 5.3 billion, and now it's tried a joint user building. So, which other departments would like to share the building with RTHK? Considering their council and the views, there's a lot of security issues, and the radio station is very important and strategic in security. Which other departments are willing to share the space with RTHK? Well, for the joint user proposal, first we need to consider the needs of RTHK itself. Since it's a broadcasting facility, for the type of equipment and facilities, not just security, but let's say the acoustics or transmission equipment will also have specific requirements, and we'll also make sure that we can share the building with departments. But we don't really have a particular preference for the departments. As soon as we've got a security site, we'll put underway. As for the security issue raised by Mr. Chair, I don't see the RTHK will have the overriding security needs. However, it's supposed to be secure and reasonable. So when considering all these requirements, when we're able to fulfill the stringent conditions set by LegCo, we should try our best. Mr. Charles Mark. The Secretary claimed that the RTHK has sufficient space and enough money for maintenance, and yet the RTHK program union said otherwise. While the TV and the radio station, the requirements are different from just any other government departments. I wonder if you have visited RTHK recently, you can see that the container boxes and even they use the car park for office, which is not ideal. Would you consider discussing with the RTHK staff, now that you have the dedicated task force for full governance, why not just bypassing the RTHK management to ask the staff directly? Would be more useful for you to go to the board of advisors. I believe that Mr. Mark's question confused the two aspects. First, for the needs for office accommodation and protection facilities, as you're well aware, otherwise we would not able to come with a schedule of accommodation. And back in 2013-14, we had clearly know what the requirements are for the equipment and the office premise requirements and the established mechanism that in the 6 locations, some of the office space, some of the production space. I believe that the RTHK management well understood that for the whole department, whether they operate need as well as that they office space need for the staff, which expect to follow. I believe that this is achievable. As for the RTHK review, it's not about the day-to-day operation of the RTHK, but instead of the 3 major terms of reference that which is set up a task force to review. And the supplement to Secretary. The RTHK knows well the department needs and the need of the staff. I would not would to do the work for them.
Government Bill. This council now becomes committee of the whole council.